Collibra, really interesting and really successful company that offers a data intelligence cloud, and we're going to talk about what that means. You most recently raised a $250 million Series G at a post-money valuation of $5.25 billion. Quick rise in valuation, very, very impressive. I'd love to start with a round of definition, starting maybe with data governance, and we'll go into others, but what's the sort of 2-minute version of what data governance actually means?
Yeah, absolutely. And diving right in, what does data governance mean? I mean, ultimately, governance is all about trust. And how do we make sure we can trust the data? We can trust how the data is being created. We can trust how it's used, managed. And from a theory perspective, it's kind of very much kind of a policy setting exercise. Again, how do we define our policies that govern the way data is being created, data is being managed, used, consumed, and so forth? What it really typically looks like is that they typically start with a business glossary. How do we make sure we have one shared common language so that we can actually understand each other, right? If I tell you, Matt, we have 5% churn, you probably want to know, like, okay, well, how exactly, what does that mean? How do we calculate that? So kind of agreeing in definition is absolutely important. It kind of creates a shared language that we can actually understand and agree on what we talk about. Then second step, typically, is about stewardship. How do we assign roles, responsibilities? Again, the organizational aspect. Who's the data steward for our customer data, for example? Again, if I have a problem, who do I go to? Who's responsible to solve it? Third is then around kind of policy management. Again, defining the policies, who can access the data, what do we do with sensitive data, what do we do with privacy data, how do we think about security policies, quality policies, and so forth. Then data help desk is typically also a big aspect to it. If there's a problem, again, how do we reach out? How do we solve that problem? And like a core part of all of it is this kind of understanding that actually you need a workflow engine, like a business process engine, to help people kind of work together effectively. And so in practice, when you hear organizations like kind of implement data governance, that's typically what it looks like.
Okay, so that's data governance. What is metadata management?
I think it's a very technical term. It's not a new term. We've been talking about metadata repositories for 30 years. So really metadata management is really the technical metadata, the tables, schemas, columns that you manage, right? But I think what has kind of happened is that the level of complexity, the level of fragmentation, the level of distribution has only increased. And so it's only become more difficult for people to actually find the right data, understand that they can use it, make sure they understand what it means. And so it's only become harder for people to actually consume and produce data. We believe kind of a new approach is required where with a metadata management kind of foundation, you really build a kind of almost what we call a system of engagement, a system of record for data, right? And so just like, I think ServiceNow is a great kind of analogy. If you go back 15 years ago, every company was investing in IT. It became chaos. Our CIO came in and said, okay, we need control. And so the IT governance happened. And then the foundation of IT governance was your configuration management database, your CMDB, right? And that then evolved into IT service management. Okay, how do we actually kind of automate all these IT workflows? And that's kind of how I think about metadata management. Today, the chief data officer, chief analytics officer comes in. This is chaos. We need more control. So initial reaction, data governance. We need to understand what data we have, where it is, who has access to it. And so we need to build that metadata management foundation. We call it the metadata graph. And on top of that, you provide these capabilities to ultimately kind of accelerate data processes, if you will.
Okay, great. If I can ask you like just another two just to make it educational and approachable by everyone. What's a data catalog, and then the next one will be what is data quality? What does that actually mean?
Yeah, so a data catalog is really kind of how do you inventorize your data? Again, how do you know what data you have in the cloud, on-premise? What are your tables, your schemas, your databases, your columns? What do they mean? And I think of it almost like the Amazonification of data, right? A data catalog is often kind of the same experience, but then for data sets. How do you allow a user, a business analyst to kind of shop for data? And it doesn't really matter where the data resides, on-prem, in the cloud, traditional databases, or the new kind.
Great. And then data quality, what does it matter? Yeah. What is it?
Again, data quality, we've seen a renaissance in data quality, a lot of kind of new data quality, data observability startups. Originally, it came from how do we make sure that our marketing database that we send mailings to, the addresses are correct. That's where data quality came from 20 years ago. Today, obviously very different. Again, as part of this kind of modern data stack where you have all these data pipelines, you need to understand what's happening in your data ecosystem, your data stack. So you need to start monitoring, observing, ensuring you understand the quality of the data as it flows through all of your systems. And that's why data quality, data observability has become so important. You have kind of in production machine learning models. If something breaks, it's a real-time kind of issue that requires real-time resolution. Great.
So let's talk about that concept of data intelligence cloud. I'd love to do a little bit of a deep dive into the Collibra platform. What is it? What does it do? There's all the components that we just talked about are sort of like merged into like one platform. So if I'm a company and I want to make sure that my data is under control, I work with Collibra, and then what do I have access to?
Yeah, so that's kind of in our evolution as a company. We started from governance, started adding capabilities, a data catalog, data lineage. Again, how does data flow through your organization? Data privacy, and now most recently data quality. And the way we think of it is as like data intelligence. That's really an organization's kind of ability to understand its entire data landscape, trust that the data is used in the right way, and then automate these workflows. And so these are really the three big components, almost three big categories if you think about data intelligence. One is around governance, lineage, and catalog. It's all about how do we make sure we understand what data we have. Second is around quality and observability, understanding what's happening with that data kind of through the whole architecture. And the third is around privacy and security, right? How do we make sure we're treating PII data, sensitive data in the right way? So these are the three big categories. So these are I went through all the kind of the products that we have combined on that one metadata graph makes our data intelligence cloud.
And at its core, when a company rolls out Collibra, you have presumably a series of connectors into all the various repositories, whether on-prem or cloud. And you don't move the data, right? Or you just collect the metadata? How does that work?
Exactly. We don't move any data. So we have kind of connectors. We tie into all of your kind of data systems on-prem in the cloud. We capture all of that metadata, tables, schemas, columns, files, and so forth. And that's kind of how we built that metadata graph. But we're not in the business of moving, storing any of the data, just the metadata. Like a library, you have the index cards. That's what we manage. The books, the data itself, wherever they are, that's not something that we deal with.
And in that analogy, who are the librarians?
Great question. So that's typically kind of the data stewards, right? And then you have different personas. The data stewards typically are the librarians that are responsible to make sure, kind of to steward the data, right? To make sure we have great definitions, we understand where it comes from, to make sure data is being treated correctly. If I'm a business analyst, I need to create a Tableau report, or if I'm a data engineer, a data scientist, I need to create an ML model. Typically, my first step is always, okay, where do I find the right data? Like I'm in marketing, I want to do a customer churn analysis or want to build a customer churn model. I need customer data. Okay, I'm sure we have lots of different copies, but where can I find the right customer data that includes all of our customers, not just European customers? How do I make sure I'm using that data correctly, because it's obviously very sensitive data? How do I make sure that legal kind of signs off on this? Do I have to manually do this? How do we capture the fact that legal has signed? So this whole coordination effort is something that we then kind of facilitate and automate. And so, of course, the data stewards are a key kind of persona, user, business analyst, data engineer, data privacy manager, data scientist. These are kind of the key users of the platform.
And who's an ideal customer for Collibra? Is that a large enterprise where there's a lot of complexity? Is that a smaller, faster growing startup? Who's best?
I'd say the bigger the complexity, the bigger the chaos, the more value we can add. And I think a small company has the similar problems as large companies, just at a different scale. What we've done really well, again, seeing where we came from after the financial crisis, started to work with all the large banks. We've been very successful in being able to kind of cope with the complexity of the largest companies in the world. We also have a lot of kind of high growth companies that have a lot of data, that have a lot of complexity around data. You would be surprised at some of those digitally native companies, very data first companies. You would think they have all of their data in order. It's definitely far from the truth. But mostly large companies, I would say, because that's where we can help the most.
I'd love to better understand how you see data governance in general and Collibra in particular sort of fit in the, some of the key trends that we've covered in this event over the last few months and years. So the rise of the modern data stack, where does that fit? Do you sit on top of the data warehouse? Is the data warehouse just like one of the many sources? How does that fit?
Like we are not part of this supply chain in the sense that we don't move the data, we don't store the data, we don't change the data. To your point, we kind of sit above, but not just the storage, the data warehouse, for example, but really across that entire supply chain, right? One of the value propositions that we think of ourselves as we kind of handle every user, every use case across every source, all the way from the source to all the way to the report, Tableau, Looker, Power BI, and everything in between. And these are kind of the three categories that we think of with data intelligence, one around kind of governance, lineage, and catalog, understanding what data you have across that entire data model data stack, quality and observability to make sure, okay, what happens through these pipelines and how do we make sure we can trust what's happening there, and then privacy and security, that everything you're building is kind of compliant to kind of regulations and security concerns. And so to your point, I think we definitely sit on top across that entire supply chain, if you will.
And the other big trend that people talk about a lot is this concept of data mesh. Where does governance fit on top of this, and how do you build for that world of decentralization?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're big fans of data mesh. And if you think about it, data mesh is really all about governance. It's really, how do you do all of that, right? It's almost like governance for architects, if you can call it that. It's because it's very much an organizational construct around decentralization. I think that's absolutely the right approach. We've seen it clearly work well within engineering. The only way to scale is to decentralize. If you look at all of these kind of data repositories, data warehouses, they all argue that just move all of your data in one place and it's going to solve all of your problems. We've been hearing that promise for the last 25 years, and it's never solved all of our problems, and it never will. Like, we have to embrace the fact that data will be diverse, different, and kind of decentralized. And so governance only becomes more important. And if you think about some of the key principles in data mesh, this kind of domain orientation, right, where you organize across domains, it's absolutely the right way to do governance. We talk about federated governance, not centralized governance. If you think about data as a product, I think that's, again, tying it back to metadata, thinking of almost like the usability around data. And we've over the last 10 years, like I said, we've been way too focused on just storing more data. And when I last talked with Jamak, she had a great quote around, we need less collecting of data, but more connecting of data, right? We have a lot of data. That's typically not the problem. It's not by storing more or having a faster database that we're gonna make our organization more data-driven or kind of better. It's really understanding the context. And that's, again, where metadata comes in. Like, how do we understand the documentation around data? Where is it coming from? What is the quality? How is it being used? How are we allowed to use it? So again, that usability of data as a product, I think, is a really important component. So we're big fans, and I think it's absolutely the right way that data has to kind of evolve the way we kind of organize ourselves around data.
One question from the group here live, which perfectly anticipates where I was going to go next, which is around competition. How do you compete with hyperscaler native solutions on that front? And more broadly, because what you do is so incredibly mission critical to any company that wants to deploy data, how do you position, how do you differentiate, and how do you win?
Yeah. So we think of that ecosystem kind of three big categories. One is around what I call the point products that do one particular thing really well, to your point, like a data quality tool, a data catalog tool, a data privacy tool. The second one is what I call the incumbents that I think have kind of missed the boat to the cloud. And I think are going to be struggled there to kind of provide that experience. And then finally, to the question, the hyperscalers, they're great at kind of managing within their ecosystem, right? If you're purely technical metadata within BigQuery or Snowflake or Databricks and so on. But then how do you tie it to the business? That's not something that they do. How do you tie it to your organizational model, your policies, your quality observability? And then most importantly, how do you bridge across, again, that entire data supply chain, talking about the modern data stack, from source to ingestion, to storage, to consumption? It's not all going to be in one place, but you want to provide that kind of broad experience. We call it that system of engagement, across your entire data function. And again, that's a differentiation, and I think it's actually a really good fit.
I'd love to switch tacks a little bit and maybe talk about the journey and what you learned. Like maybe walk us through the beginning, and in particular, how you nailed the initial product market fit, which is this sort of elusive starting point that so many entrepreneurs look for.
Yeah, it's a great question. And so we started 2008, just when the financial crisis happened. But that's when we started, and then had to kind of fight 4 years, kind of fight to kind of find product market fit. And actually the financial crisis helped us. That's kind of where we find product market fit in the financial service industry, compliance and governance rated around data governance, because all of the large banks had to comply to a lot of new regulations after the financial crisis. They basically had to prove to the regulators that they were in control of their data. Like, okay, you give me a report that shows a number, explain to me where that number comes from. When we started, I think there was one chief data officer at Capital One. Now I think there's 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. So just again, this rise of the chief data officer is almost like a proxy with the rise of our revenue. 14 years in, and we're still looking at so much kind of new companies being started, doing what we do, and it's just an exciting place to be in.
And how do you navigate a roadmap over such a long period of time, right? Because in 2008, like the world was in a certain state, and it was largely pre-cloud effectively, and sort of pre-big data, and certainly pre the resurgence of like machine learning and AI. And today we're in a completely different world. Like, how do you build a product, a platform, make sure that the older parts are not completely antiquated while you build the new stuff?
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, so with our vision, we ultimately believe that data was important, right? And I think that clearly has been shown to be true and kind of accepted by everyone now. I think to a point, like continuing kind of to innovate as you see these kind of architectural, technological shifts is not always easy. It requires sometimes hard decisions. And I'm really happy that 4 years ago, we've made this decision that cloud is going to be the future. And we've kind of started this kind of cloud transition architecturally from a business model perspective. And you say obvious right now, but 4 years ago, most of the data products at the time were in the cloud. We're still kind of Hadoop, we're still Tableau on-prem. And so doing cloud data wasn't as obvious. A lot of our customers still manage their data on-prem, and we of course, we're fine with that. But because we only capture the metadata, we've built an architecture that is able to do a hybrid, which is important. But ultimately, the experience needs to be SaaS. That's kind of the bar nowadays. But there's lots of fight. The biggest fight was all the way in the beginning when we actually started going back to finding product market fit with kind of semantic data integration. We want to do data integration better. We tried for 2 years, had 0 customers. And so that's when we kind of pivoted into kind of data governance. We're just way too early. It's great to see the innovation now around data integration, ETL. But that was a big fight.
How do you scale the team? In particular, there's always this really interesting tension between promoting people from within, especially the people that were early in the company, and then like bringing experience management that have seen the next level of scale you're in. What's your philosophy on that?
It's hard. I use this quote that I've stolen from somewhere at a Rare that in the beginning you're like a pirate ship. The only thing that matters is kind of preserve cash and sell, like build product or sell product. Over time, you need to build more like a Navy ship where it needs to be more structured, again, ownership, but more repeatable, more processes. And again, put a pirate on a Navy ship, that's not going to work. Put a Navy captain on a pirate ship, that's not going to work either. But that's kind of what you're going through. And so you have to that's a massive kind of change management exercise. And you're going to make mistakes. You're going to bring in people too early. You're gonna lose people too soon. And unfortunately, I think it's part of the journey. And I've just learned every year is kind of different. And you have to kind of explain what you're doing, why is it important. But I would recommend all kind of founders, CEOs, building a leadership team. It's probably one of the most important jobs that you have. And I remember the first leadership team I've built, I thought these are all amazing people, and they all are amazing people. And I thought that was going to be your leadership team for the next foreseeable future. And 2 or 3 years later, it was a different leadership team. So just go to that really quickly when you're growing and changing really quickly. And that's, I think it's one of the harder things to manage as a kind of founder CEO.
Yeah. And a little bit to that point, and maybe as a last question. How do you personally, as a founder and CEO, navigate this, right? There's such a difference and a tension between the kind of skills that you need as an early stage founder, which is all about like being visionary and selling on your vision when you have nothing to show, and then the stage where you're at, right, which is effectively pre-IPO, soon IPO, hopefully, where you need to be this super efficient manager. And you said, which I hadn't realized, that it was your first job, that you have never done this. Like at a very personal level, like do you have mentors? Do you read all the time? Like how does one learn the job on the job?
Yeah, again, cliche, surround yourself. Again, the reason that you need to build a great leadership team is exactly for that reason. Find great investors, great board members, mentors. Again, surround yourself. But I think it's also, it's around wanting to do it, right? Because I often hear like, I'm an entrepreneur, I don't want to be a manager. But if you don't want to be a manager, then it's not going to work out, right? And that's a decision that you have to make yourself. So you'll have to want to do it. And also, I don't think it's all rocket science. It's not that super complex. It's all pretty logical if you surround yourself well. And almost think of it like, I have a product background, right? Software engineer. So initially you build a product, and now you build a company, and you have to think about communication, just like you have APIs and SLAs in a product. You need to do the same thing on the company level, right? You have to modularize, you have the components, you have to kind of org chart. So anyway, there's actually a lot of analogies. And so it's all not that super complex, but you have to want to do it. You have to, I think, be super humble and always kind of want to learn, like having that growth mindset, I think is super important. And then just surround yourself with great people that you can learn from.
Great. One last question from the group, since we're just talking about this. How do you surround yourself with mentors in a remote environment? And I guess to expand the question, how do you any lessons learned in this pandemic? Like you obviously operate on a couple of continents and grew a global company. Any lessons learned in making distributed team work well together and make sure that everybody learns and find mentors and all the things?
Yeah, I don't think I have any kind of silver bullets or secrets to share. But like I had a few new executives as part of the executive team without having seen them in person ever. And so you just have to get over this kind of very uncomfortable idea that you would hire a leader in a company without ever seeing them. But I think it worked out really, really well. Kind of keep investing and bringing the team together while still being distributed, I think continues to be super important, building that trust. And on the mentors, in a way, it's easier as well, right? The pool in which you can fish, so to speak, gets bigger as well. Like you're not constrained anymore into the 50-mile radius or something like that. It's all remote and plus travel. And so I think you can actually cast a wider net. So in that sense, there's a benefit to actually find mentors more globally.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing all of this, including the journey, which is always fascinating. And congratulations on everything you guys have done.
Thank you. I
realize you are just getting started. I am looking forward to seeing all the success compounding over the next few years. You've clearly built a very important company. So thanks again. Appreciate it. And thanks to everyone who joined us tonight. We'll see you guys next time.